Welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Pradyumna Nag, who has a very interesting description of what he does. He calls himself a growth-focused, outsourced CFO. He's worked in the big four accounting firms before and consulted for a bunch of different startups and enterprises across the world on things like market entry strategy, business planning, forecasting, fundraise, and more. We'll cover a lot of this in conversation. So without further ado, welcome Pradyumna to the Startup Operator Podcast.
Thanks, Roshan. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, great to have you here as well. So to begin things, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, in particular your transition from being a chartered accountant into the realm of business consulting?
Sure. So I think the fact that I'm a chartered accountant still stays, right? So education-wise and as well as the way you look at things are kind of are defined by the way you have kind of grown up, right? So to a large extent, the way I think about business comes from the education part to it, and when you add that to what you really love to do or like to do, right, that becomes consulting. So at least for me, that journey kind of become consulting because I really loved to work with multiple businesses on multiple problems because I always kind of felt underutilized to a large extent. When I was working only on a single problem, and then there would be new problems that I could find, but there was always a restriction on what you can and can't do because with consulting firms, essentially the way you risk a project or an engagement is extremely watertight, and rightly so, right? So about 11 years, I think 10 and a half years back, we started Prequate. So once I came out of KPMG, we started Prequate with kind of the vision to like instead of flatten the curve, I would use the word flatten the bridge, right? So make it more accessible kind of for businesses in their journey to who are traversing from A to B, but give them the same value that a big four would give, but at a lower price, right? So essentially our value prop was we're going to give you a high quality service, but with a great cost arbitrage. Right? So that's how we started off about 10 and a half years back. But about 6 years back, we kind of had a dawning of sorts, right? So our fundamental hypothesis was that you start working with companies really early. As they grow, they start consuming the services that you're really great at. And once you kind of, build a little bit above and over and over and over, you keep building on the relationship with the client. They are going to be at a situation where they can buy the services that you're really going to make money out of. But that hypothesis was really, really questioned when we kind of looked back and we saw about 90% of our business was really coming in from that cost arbitrage sale, right? Not purely from the value delivery sale. And we would be extremely passionate as an organization to work on consulting projects where there's problems to be solved and you need to collaborate, you need to work with business owners at a very board level. But we were doing most of the time the work that could be done by anybody else, right? So essentially the way we looked at business itself needed to change because if we are spending 90% of our time doing what we are not excited to do, then maybe you need to take some drastic steps. So about 6 years back, we kind of took a very, very deep plunge, killed off the cash cow, much to the disdain of our team, our founders. Right, we just took that step because we realized that if you see a really wide space, right? Like if you're able to see the moon, right? The first thing that you need to do as an organization is plant a flag. Right? What's most valuable on the moon right now is the American flag that flies. Right. So we said if this is how consulting for SMEs is, there's hardly anybody that organizations know of who they can afford and engage with, especially in the medium size to small size businesses. We should be the ones who they're going and talking to. So that's kind of how we made that transition, and it did cost us a lot. About 90% of our revenue as well as 80% of our team was working on these services. So it did hurt us quite a bit from a cash flow perspective, but I think it's a wiser choice, right? So once you come out to the other side, we've had about 4 years kind of conquering that space. We are one of the more recognizable brands in this space, and that kind of pays off. So
Yeah.
businesses start looking at you very, very differently.
Yeah. On that point, I mean, I remember, talking to you, I think 5 or 6 years back, and we know each other for many years now, right? We followed each other's work.
Right.
And what you were suggesting at that point of time in terms of consulting for startups seemed rather new, actually, right? And there were a bunch of other people who were trying to do somewhat similar things, uh, right? And I feel like you've really invested in that brand, in that Prequate brand, um, whether it's in terms of building a network or investing in solid content as well. So if you happen to have Pradyumna on your contact list, you will definitely get one of his reports on WhatsApp, right? So there's a lot of value add and there's a lot of investment that you put into the startup ecosystem as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Roshan. So if you look at us as an organization, right? So we have to till about 3 or 4 years back, we were very, very docile. We were still the typical kind of approach to the market that you just wait for customer referrals to kind of show up,
Yeah.
right? But your true expertise or thought leadership is never at play. And if you need to make that work, if you need businesses to know about you, then obviously you need to be also telling them day in and day out what you stand for as a brand,
Absolutely.
right? So we had taken it kind of lightly initially, coming from the consulting space where you're just in one of the functions. You don't see the other side to it, which is how do you create a brand. So we kind of stepped the gas about 3 years back into trying to, carve out this niche for ourselves, and that's kind of paid off, right? So that's why I said, we're one of the more recognizable brands. The other bit is, in terms of consulting model itself, we were one of the very, very early people who said, hey, outcome-based models are the future, right? You can't be selling services by the hour anymore, because one, it makes you extremely unscalable as a business, and second one, at some point of time, a business is going to have a situation where they're going to have to allocate cash, and when they do that, they don't find outcomes which are directly linked to you. They're obviously going to find, they're going to cut exactly where you are, right? So
Right.
that's kind of where
Especially now, right?
yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's, I think, right now consultants are at the worst place they could be in terms of kind of holding on to their relationships. So that I think was a big realization. Another big realization actually came from this book that I happened to read at that point of time by Duff McDonald, called The Firm, right, which spoke about McKinsey's journey over the. I think they had about now they're about 100-year plus firm, but the real journey of from when they moved from accounting as a concept or a service to management accounting, right? And all the levels of leadership that happened post that were on building the strength of the knowledge layer, right? On how can they make engagements high quality? How can they make talent high quality? So that's kind of the journey that we also took 3 years back. Now you can't afford 100 years to build a brand anymore. So you have to get those learnings in and start working on them.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that that you recognize that we've put in a lot of effort. So
No, absolutely. I mean, so a lot of I would say growth related things or whatever, right? I mean, people keep looking for hacks and people keep looking for sexy things that they can do, smart, ingenious things that they can do. But basic 101 things that if they are done right, are fantastic, right? I mean, fantastic levers for growth. Something like your reports that you share on WhatsApp, right? I mean, it's phenomenal. It creates top of the mind recall that, hey, I mean, these guys are working on X, Y, or Z, right? And it also is a way of being really proactive, as you rightly put. I mean, as a services firm, you can rely on referrals, and referrals are a great channel for acquisition, customer acquisition. But you could actually go out there and build a brand proactively. So really happy to see that whole journey that you've been through, right? So a lot of your work revolves around, looking at business models and stuff, right? Um, what do you see as common problems, and how do you advise founders on the same? Is there something that, obviously they should beware of certain things, but is there such a thing as a perfect business model or something like an optimal business model?
Right. Yeah, I think this is also very very important question. It's so pertinent today because the situations that we are dealing with has no precedent. Right? There are no lessons that you can just reapply
Absolutely.
as out of a standard rule book. Right. That being said, the way I look at business models and the way I think founders or any entrepreneur should look at business models is as a continuously evolving subject, which is focused on your unique value proposition. Right. So, if today, for example, I was listening to this other webinar, right? So, of a company that moved to selling masks, right? And they said, "Hey, it's a great transition, right?" So, it's great if you're an e-commerce company, right? It's helping you get more reach. But if you're not an e-commerce company, then what are you doing, right? So, you might be doing something to survive, but that's not necessarily what you should be doing in the long run. Right? So that being said, the way you look at a business model, when I say evolution of business models, I really like to look at how that kind of plays out into the love that you share from the customer. Right. So if, for example, I'm looking, let's look at Slack. Right. They're very uni-purpose based. Right. Team communication. They could also try and add, their own document management system, but they don't. The reason being that the value proposition that they're building is to make things smooth within the organization, right? So they did open up the making things smooth with the public Slack channels and things like that. That's a way for you to reach out to an audience which is much larger than your organization. But still, communication is the problem that they addressed. If they went into document management, they were going into infrastructure, right? Which is a complete tangent, and that spins out of the orbit for the organization itself, which means as a founder you would get pulled to two directions rather than sticking with one
Yeah.
and having
That's
all
a
your ducks.
Yeah, that's a very important point, right? Sticking to what is your absolute essential value and then building around that. Because, even today, I mean, with all of its ecosystem and everything, if you ask people what they use Slack for, it's communication, right?
Right.
Yeah. Good.
And that kind of also helps you cement a certain space in the consumer's mind. Right.
Yeah.
So even if I do 10 things, I'm diluting what I'm doing. Like for example, look at us. We could very easily, considering the number of chartered accountants in our team, we could very easily start an accounting or a compliance service kind of thing, saying, hey, it's allied to the outcomes that I'm going to deliver anyway. But it really diffuses uh, what you are providing as a value proposition, right? So I can't guarantee with an extremely standardized need to have service. I can't guarantee the outcomes that I can with a consulting assignment, right? So if I can't do it, why am I doing it, right? So if I'm not going to be able to provide value in every interaction,
Mm.
why am I doing it? So I guess that's what business models kind of need to have, is the ability to continuously play on the single core strength that they're built that is built out of the value proposition.
Right. So one of the things that chartered accountants are famously known for is cutting out all of the bullshit, right? So, I mean, you look at things very dispassionately, very objectively, right? Do the whole right hand side, left hand side kind of equation thing, and reinforce the focus on fundamentals. So I'm glad, I mean, that sort of ties in with all of the consulting that you do as well. So another key aspect that you also work on is fundraising. And I mean, we've had investors before on the show, and a lot of the advice converges around great idea, great team, great execution, right? uh, what are some of the things that are important but are ignored?
Right. So if you look at it, out of the deal experience that I've had, and today the organizations that I've worked with in terms of enterprise value, they're over $1 billion,
Wow.
right? And one thing that kind of unites them, at least from their ability to command uh, funding from the market, is that the founders themselves or the core team members themselves, there's an extremely good reason of why they are in that business. right? So no founder will come and say, hey, there's a fantastic reason of why I am leading Dunzo, or why I'm leading Vedantu, or why I'm leading Flipkart. But there is, right? So the experience that somebody has or carries has to kind of also justify the fact that they are the right people to be backing in that space,
Yeah.
because there is no pitch, or there is no business model
Yeah.
which is 100% unique to an investor, right? There could be, like, in single, for example, every time the market switches. So there was a focus on blockchain, then now there is a focus on AI and ML. So every time those kind of technological advancements happen, or acceptance of technological advancements happen, there are a few new kinds of business models that arise out of it.
Yeah.
But apart from that, most of the people that are kind of pitching to an investor. So there was an investor that I was speaking with, who works in one of these top tier VC firms, and they receive 2,000 pitches a month, right?
Wow.
And if you really ask them, they will say, hey, most of them are very close to what we have already seen, right?
Right.
But what they try to sieve through and pick are those guys who are really able to answer a why them.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a fantastic point that you bring up. I think, Paul Graham, if I remember correctly, covered this in one of his essays. And I think he called it The Secret, right? So why me? Why now, right? So what do you know about the market or the problem that you're solving that nobody has an
Nobody
understanding
else.
of?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic point that you bring up. Um,
Yeah. And another thing, just to kind of
yeah.
add to that, one of the things that I have also seen, which a lot of founders who do not raise money kind of end up doing, is a heavy amount of diffusion of focus onto things that are not necessarily the best use of their time, right? So,
Right.
for example, like I was giving you the example of Slack and not getting into document management.
Yeah.
Many believe that, hey, it's going to improve my LTV, right? So if I add document management into it, it's a great play. But the way an investor looks at it is, you have a problem worth solving already in communication.
Yeah.
Right? Why are you trying to solve two when you can
Yeah.
make the same amount of
Great
money
point.
solving one?
Great point.
So I think that's kind of critical
Yeah.
for founders. So for example, let's say uh, if you're looking at, let's take an example of Vedantu, right? If Vedantu also said that, hey, I'm going to go into content creation as my primary business model, I'm going to take on Byju's, the first question would be why, right?
Yeah.
Why are you so great at doing content? Because you're taking on two challenges as a founder instead of taking on one and doing that
Yeah.
well.
No, that's a great point as well, right? See, arguably, I mean, if you sell chocolates or ice cream to your customers, you increase your customers' lifetime value as well, right? So, I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's as ridiculous as that. I mean, I can understand, exploring these adjacents at some point, when you're a little more ahead in the journey.
Correct.
But then, I mean, to look at it when you still haven't really solved your fundamental problem is. I mean, it's as you put it. I mean, as you put it rightly, it's a bit of a diversion. Yeah. So
Right.
it's sort of like. I mean, I'm sorry I'm using the term, but it's sort of like looking at your business as a balance sheet, right? I mean, what you can. Yeah. So what you can make more attractive and so on, right?
Right.
Um, so now you worked with a lot of early stage startups. So what are the common pitfalls that you see while they scale? I mean, when they're going from the 0 to 1, there's certain number of challenges. But when they're going from a 1 to 10, how can they avoid some of these common mistakes? And what should founders focus on in this journey?
Right. Um, so the way I look at it, because this might be a bias because of the fact that I'm also a chartered accountant by qualification, but uh, is measurables, right? So the only true objective definition in a business is the money that you're making, right, or the time that you're spending, or the way your resources are utilized. So they have to have a financial or a numeric benchmark for everything that you're doing in a business, right? If you don't measure it, then you can't improve it, right? You don't know what you're going for. The common pitfall that I have seen is the lack of these measurement systems among businesses that are scaling really fast, right? Or it could be the other one, which is that they have all of these measurement systems, but they're not following through on the right metrics. right? It's very, very critical that what you're focused on is extremely important, either to showcase the love that you have from your customer, or to showcase the way you're going to be acquiring customers, or the validation of the process that you're using. Whatever it is, there has to be a numeric that can quantify it. You should have a goal towards it, and you should be continuously following up on that goal. Right. So, for example, when we work on engagements, especially around the performance management, we focus on something that we like to call as 6 key metrics, right? So, which is essentially those 6 metrics that are important from a valuation standpoint or from a business value itself, right? So, valuation is what you provide to an investor, and business value is what you're driving internally, right? So, many of them can have common metrics, but these metrics allow you to cut out all of those things that could diffuse your focus and focus exactly on those points that you need to keep improving, right? The second thing, though, is that many founders, even if they do this bit right, they don't have an external, whether it's an external team member, or whether it is somebody within the organization who's playing like let's say an operational excellence thing, looking at all those other key metrics just so that they do not become a problem area in the future. Right? So if you have, you are focused on the key metrics, you have somebody else focused on all those non-key metrics that could become potential key metrics, then you kind of figured it out. But if you don't have measurement systems at all, then you run the risk of not being able to track business on a day-to-day level because you are so occupied with, with the operational activities on a day in and day out basis. And at the end of the day, a founder has only 24 hours, just like everybody else in the world, right? So how you spend those 24 hours can extremely be improved if you have measurement systems which are continuously drawing inferences from what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, very important point. As the kids say, I mean, you're dropping truth bombs, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think the most underrated thing is founder management of, like, managing the time and energy, right? I think that's the most important thing. I want to pick up on something that you said right now in terms of metrics, right? What are the key metrics? Now, from a CFO perspective, what are those essential key metrics that a founder has to focus on? I mean, you could split it across journeys.
Sure. So unfortunately, the way most people kind of look at the function of a CFO is as an external, person from the business and from the operations, right? But he's not. So if like you read out my description, you said a growth-focused tech CFO, right? So what that means is that I become very involved in the business itself, right? As a CFO, you're not an accountant or you're not a reporting a manager, right? Your job is, while it is also to ensure that compliances are healthy, your business or your balance sheet is looking fine, it's also to play a huge role in terms of what you as an organization are doing, right? So from that perspective, a lot of the goals that a CEO and has are also going to be translated into the metrics or measurements that a CFO needs to have, right? If they're not, then you're going to be working at cross purposes, right? So you might make a call which might seem unjudicious. Let's say, for example, you embark on a $5 million marketing spend. For the CFO, it's crazy, right? $5 million is a big number, and your CAC is haywire. But if he does not have the context, then he's not going to be able to judge the ROI on it. So he has to be as involved as everybody else in the organization. But to kind of answer your question, right? There are always a few key metrics. I coming from a lot of tech, and I'm also assuming that a lot of the people who follow you are tech businesses, right? So considering that it's them who are the audience, I think the key metrics are your essential 5 to 6 SaaS metrics that you have, or 5 to 6 tech metrics that you have, which are going to be around your CAC, your LTV, your revenue per user, or your revenue per contract, or average contract value, or relationship, your NPS scores. Those are the key metrics that any business or any organization needs to look at. But the CFO's job is to kind of drill it down. Like NPS is an outcome-driven score, right? It gives you a health measurement at the end of it, right? So if you, for example, let's say you have a high cholesterol as a problem, right? So you're not going to attack it by saying that, hey, I have low cholesterol, I have low cholesterol, or you're not going to take a pill that's going to give you low cholesterol, right? What you're going to do is you're going to work on all the things that led to high cholesterol as a problem and start working on it, right? It could be your diet, it could be your exercise, it could be what you're spending time or how actively you are during the day. So the CFO's job is to kind of translate this down into further key metrics that become more actionable, right? So NPS by itself might be a great number for you to evaluate, but there are a lot of other things which have a cascading effect and that cause that NPS, right? So finding that out is going to be critical, and it varies from business to business.
So a lot of the folks listening to you are really might be surprised about how a chartered accountant, a finance person knows things like SaaS and so on. But if you're listening to this, Pradyumna is one of the guys. I mean, who I've seen at least was early on a bunch of trends, right? Whether that's SaaS or fintech or blockchain, AI, etc. Right. So I'm not surprised in the least that he's talking about these things. So Pradyumna, that brings me to the other aspect of what you mentioned, right? Pretty much startups view, first of all, they view accounting and finance as the same, right?
Right.
Even though I think there's an overlap, but there may be some significant differences in terms of the purpose behind each, right? So my experience of accountants is 99% of the time they tell you what you should not be doing or what you can't do, right? And as an operator, you sort of view these as blockers, right? So one of the first things that I tell any chartered accountant that I have to work with is, boss, I know that there are a bunch of things that I can't do, but your job is to tell me how that's possible, right? Help me work around these things, right?
Right.
Don't be a thorn in the neck. And I've seen a few people. I mean, our common friend Shankar is a fantastic example of this, right? Even the accounting team at Waymo as well, right? Phenomenal bunch of guys who really induce an appreciation for why certain things are the way they are, right? Uh, so how can startups really benefit from having a CFO focus early on?
Right. So, see, one of the key things that at least from an accounting and finance, the kind of confusion that people tend to have is they think finance means just what's left in your bank account, right? So, accounting is a great way of measuring it. So they believe that accounting is something that's a need to have because statutorily I need to do this, I need to maintain books. And if you speak to most founders, they say, "Hey, I know how much money is in the bank, right? So do I need a CFO?" Right? I'm very involved in the operations. I don't need a CFO, right? So, but the truth to the matter is, a CFO's job is not about affordability only. It's also about ROI, right? So, if you are making a spend, what are you spending
Great
it
point.
towards, and what is the ROI against it, right? So that's the job of a CFO, which means that he needs to understand the business. So when you put a revenue goal for the year, if a CFO is not in complete understanding of how that goal is going to be achieved, then you're going to have a gap between what you're spending towards and whether you have a budget for it. But if he knows very clearly of how you're doing and how you're going to get there, then the way they will at least judiciousize the spending will be very different, right? And I think that's a big transformation that has happened over the last few years because there are a few practitioners who've come out who've played CXO roles, right? So there are CEOs who very closely uh, work with their CFOs over time, and then CFOs become more adept at how to manage the finance function in a way that it provides insight rather than providing these roadblockers like you mentioned. Right. So insight is extremely critical. It's something that's there in the data that they can very easily fetch, just that they do not think from a business point of view. I think crossing that bridge can only happen with experience and expertise, right? So in working with businesses at a very core level and working with CXOs mostly. So a number of CFOs that are coming out today have that experience and expertise because they're working very closely with the management. It's not anymore like a separate silo of expertise that is sitting in a unit where you send out a budget or you send out a report and somebody is required to just measure against it. Right now they're getting very involved. So if you say this is my budget for the year, there's a rationale for that budget that is based on what the business is actually going to be doing for that year. So that's kind of how CFO's role has evolved. And that's why you see in the West, especially, a number of CFOs are the incumbent CEOs, right? Or
Correct. Exactly.
uh,
Yeah.
so if you look at Uber,
Yeah.
the current CEO of Uber, Dara, is a CFO of another organization that was, part of the same group that was brought
Yeah.
in because he knows how the business works from a metric side, right? He knows how growth drivers work, and he knows how to translate that into an IPO opportunity in the future.
Yeah.
So that's the role that CFOs play is extremely powerful. Just that it's a little misunderstood on where in the value curve they can come in.
Yeah.
So from personal experience, we have worked as an outsourced CFO for a company which had just a business plan in a PowerPoint, right? And that's if you really think about it, a big question would be, hey, do they, what role can you play there, right? But the work that we did for him on the revenue modeling side, to how the business needs to be structured, or how the LTV can be increased, it might all be an extrapolation, but it's a fantastic extrapolation that needs to happen, right? If you need to understand what you're going for and what value is it to chase after a particular business line, right? So I think that's the role that a
Yeah.
CFO can have from the early stages to the later stages. I mean, they become essential, right? At some point of time,
Absolutely.
uh, there is enough to command somebody to come in and work full time. But till that time, it's not that affordability should not be the kind of the reason that you stay away from getting quality help, at least on this
Yeah.
parameter.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, fantastic points. So one of the things is the most common attribute of founders is they find a problem and they go about solving it, right? So if you look at product or engineering folks, for example, which is very common in the realm that we operate, tech startup ecosystem, right? Person has experienced a problem, knows how to solve it, and goes about solving it, right? I really feel the value of a CFO is in sort of taking a step back and observing it from a lens of business viability, right? So, is your product or the problem that you're solving, right, significant enough for you to invest about 10 years of your life in this? And having that focus early on, I think, is a tremendous benefit. And
Right.
if not full time, at least just have someone, as a consultant or just as a
Consult.
sounding board. Um, it can be of phenomenal value. And in fact, my brother made the transition from CFO to CEO as well. So
Okay.
I'm fairly familiar with what you're saying, right?
Right.
So, so assume that for whatever reasons, a business has plateaued, right? How can founders relook their business and do a successful pivot? What do you think goes into all of those elements of decision making and then execution afterwards?
I think essentially the question that you asked me, Roshan, is in two bits, right? So one is what makes a successful pivot, and the second is what should we be doing now, right? So let me answer the second one first. As a founder or as an entrepreneur, the biggest advice that I can kind of give to anybody, and I do it with all my clients, is do as little as possible, right? So just focused on primarily on what drives value to your users and your customers, right? If it doesn't drive value, but it's making you a little bit of money, it might be time to kind of exit those opportunities, right? Because it's not necessarily right now that you're going to get, you're going to be able to create opportunities for two or three or four different product lines or service lines. It's enough to be invested in one, and you can see it through, right? So that's one of the key things. So for example, one of the clients that we were working with, that never really looked at their profitability over time from an LOB level, right? Like a line of business level. And they were making super normal profits, just doing business as usual. But when we kind of came in and started working with them, we started to realize that one of their business lines, which was making about 20% of their revenue, was losing them money every month, right? But they had kind of, I think, maybe willingly or unwillingly, it could be either, they just turned a blind eye, because that's kind of what got them the into where they were today, right? So they started off with this service line, so maybe they had a bias towards it. But when we started asking the hard question, we started realizing that something that loses you money actually affects your profitability, and it's a huge diffusion of focus, right? So if you look at their sales team, they were spending 16 to 17% of their sales effort on selling a product which was losing them money, right? And if you ask them, they said, I need to sell more because, if only if I sell more will I get better occupancy or better utilization rates. So what they were trying to do was a vicious circle that they could never get out of. When we gave them the advice, we ran a lot of simulations around what will happen if we were to stop that business line completely. They started seeing a huge impact on the profitability, right? And this talent pool, which was underutilized, could be repurposed and reskilled to do something better, right? To work on another business line better, because they had a wealth of expertise that they'd built over a number of years. Right. So, as founders and promoters, I think you have to always kind of keep your eye on what are those products or services that you don't need to be doing anymore because they don't tie into the value proposition you're offering anymore. The second thing that I feel most of them should be doing is relooking at pricing. Right. So, there is a report, at least from the SaaS perspective. There's a report that we wrote, and we wrote a small little white paper last year, and I was absolutely blown. So, everybody who's relooked at pricing has had on average 16% increase in revenue. That's free money, right? That's money that you left off the table. And more than 98% did not see a decrease in customers because they changed their pricing. And if you ask founders, they say, hey, my customers will go away if I change the pricing now, right? But it's such an evolving science. Pricing is such an evolving science. And every 3 months, every 6 months, you should be looking at pricing because that's probably the most valuable thing that you could do that can get you cash into the system.
So that's a fantastic point, especially because founders sort of grossly underestimate the value of their products and services, right? Because as a founder, your first priority is to get that customer, right? And I mean, there is that nervousness, and so one of the fundamental difference between a founder and a VP of sales is this, precisely this, right? Because a VP of sales knows what the actual value that is being consumed and can price that product appropriately, right? So that's again a fantastic point that you brought up.
Right. One of the things that I have seen or observed with founder-led businesses, right? Like where the founders still play a very critical role in the pricing and still play a very critical role in client conversations is exactly what you mentioned, right? This notion that the pricing that we have is right. And they grossly undervalue or underestimate what can be commanded in the market. And like the same position that you mentioned, they don't want to change the pricing because they have this bias, but that's a very unfounded bias, right? Like I mentioned the statistic, 98% did not see a drop in accounts, right, from changing the pricing. So if you're really good at what you're doing, you're selling a product that your customer needs, then why aren't you commanding the price that can be commanded? Right. So I think that's kind of my take on the pricing side, at least.
No, it's a very, very important point, and the point that you mentioned earlier as well, right, is to stick to your fundamentals, learn from that, and be relevant going forward. So Pradyumna, we have a little bit of a rapid fire round. So short and interesting answers to the following question. The best founder or startup that nobody yet knows about?
I think maybe that nobody knows about, I don't know, but Eric Young of Zoom. So I think a lot of people know about him, but they don't really know the vision with which he's built Zoom. So I'm going to give it over to you because it's rapid fire.
Okay. The best turnaround or pivot story that you've seen?
Microsoft. By far, I think Microsoft.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, first to choose software over hardware, then to choose the internet. Phenomenal. And, when we say pivot, I mean, we're talking about 5-10 people, whatever. But I mean, imagine pivoting at the size of Microsoft, right? Many
Absolutely.
thousands, tens of thousands of people, many billions of dollars in revenue, making those hard decisions is phenomenal.
Yeah. So if you hear actually his interview, I think when Satya Nadella took over and then moved to SaaS as a business model, right? Bill Gates was not on board, right? But he said that, hey, listen, you're going to be leading the business, so I'm going to leave it to you.
Phenomenal.
So as a founder, right, you're still not going to change. But when new leadership comes in, I think they were able to accept the new leadership. So I think that's praiseworthy right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, the best fundraise story that you've heard or experienced?
Okay.
Something crazy that you thought could never raise a dime or, ever be successful, become a success.
Right. So my definition of success is different from fundraising, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is a client of ours who is not from the technology background at all, and he ended up raising one of the largest seed rounds in India at that time, at least, right? In AI, right, with a PowerPoint presentation. That's it. Just a conversation, right?
Crazy.
And it's mind blowing, right? What you as a founder can have the tenacity to go and pitch to seasoned investors about technology, a business that they know 100 times
Right.
what you know about, and still get a check,
Right.
right? And I think that was by far one of the most surprising stories. I mean, even he knows it because I always keep telling him that you pulled off the impossible. Because I had all my bets against you raising that money, but you still did it anyway, right? So I think that's, I can't name the company, unfortunately, but those who know me know who I'm talking about.
That's amazing. So if you had to choose SaaS or consumer internet?
SaaS, definitely. I think it's extremely powerful for one single. Every time we've had technological advancement, right? So you had a couple of big changes that happened from a business model perspective,
Yeah,
right from the personal computer to internet-based businesses to now. I think it's the time for SaaS. You can sit here and sell value to a customer, and you could be a 10-man shop, and you could sell to a Fortune 500 company, right? So never
absolutely.
have the dynamics been so attractive, at least from a
Yeah.
entrepreneur perspective.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I was discussing the same thing on a previous podcast, and roughly, if you look at it as three waves of evolution of startups, we're on the third wave, which is the SaaS wave,
Right.
and I think the Indian SaaS wave is going to be, orders of magnitudes larger than any of the things that have come before, right? Whether it's
Right.
.com or consumer internet or whatever. Okay, so if you had to choose between Flipkart and Ola,
Oh, that's very, very hard. But I
from a
think I would
CFO hat,
choose Flipkart.
okay,
I
for
mean, both in their
sentimental reasons.
own right have done something amazing, right? But I think Flipkart, for the fantastic way in which they got
Yeah,
India to buy online. It's a mammoth task.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
mammoth task for
yeah.
somebody to transact online, especially when, in 2007 you had smartphones entering the market, right? And that's when they were created.
Mm.
And now, if you look at 2013, 14, all that amount of time that they spent trying to get Indians to transact online, it's only been them who took up that task. So,
Yeah,
like we know with Ola, there was still a market that was being created with the entry of Uber.
yeah.
But here there was a thought process that they needed to change within
Yeah.
their customers. So
I
I
think
think
the
that
key,
for
yeah,
pulling
I
that
think the
off.
key thing is the behavioral change, right? The amount of behavioral change.
Yeah.
People were used to commuting. Maybe, I mean, they found a new and a more seamless way to commute with Uber and Ola. But I mean, I remember the old days. I mean, you had to actually convince people to pay online, right?
Right.
Which is, I mean,
Without seeing the product,
without
with
seeing the
with the
product.
trust.
Exactly. Phenomenal shift, that's happened, right? I mean, I right now I can't remember the last time I ordered something on cash on delivery, right? So that's how
Yeah.
far all of us have come. Yeah. Okay, again, continuing with the if you had to choose, and I think I know the answer to this, but if you had to choose between, let's say, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos,
I think Bill Gates.
obviously, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
I think Jeff Bezos. I mean, it's a very, very tough call. I love what I've been a fan of the Amazon story from very, very early days that I was following technology, like this 2008, 9, 10, right? I mean, he's done something fantastic, but I
right.
think with Bill Gates, the transition of the business itself, right, from move from personal computing to hardware as a business, to look at hiving off the right businesses at the right time,
Yeah.
Looking at building leadership, I think it's a much larger task to do it when you have when you're the backbone, right? So right now, there is no system that I know of which does not have a Microsoft product on
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's, reaching down a single small town and having your product there. I think that's glorious. So
Yeah.
from
And as a CFO, you must have some sort of a bias against Bezos for like being unprofitable or making losses for 15 years straight, right?
No, no, not at all. I actually, when businesses
Yeah,
are in
I
the
was
red, yeah, yeah, no, no. When businesses are in the red, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like even I hear this quite often, right? A lot of the channels or groups that I'm on, they keep saying, "Hey, how can they be so valuable? They're losing money." But just
mm,
think about what they've created. 51% of commerce in the US runs on Amazon. I mean,
fantastic.
just imagine what power they have over a market.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's justifiable.
Yeah. No, I mean, on e-commerce itself, right? Apparently, the world e-commerce, like the number of transactions that happen online, is about 3 to 5% even now, right? And this is after all of those years of what is it? I think 3 decades of some sort of online commerce, right? So really, I mean, the potential to go beyond is just awesome. So
Right.
I think we roughly spoke about this earlier, but one thing founders grossly underestimate about CFOs, or the need for a CFO.
Uh, I think is their ability to bring new relationships to the table.
Mm.
Um, CFOs are very fluid, right? So within an organization, they
Yeah,
hold no grudges, and everybody is somehow in conversation with them. Uh, if they, if you need the right person to join your organization, your CFO is probably the best person to be able to get that person on board.
yeah,
So I think it's heavily underutilized, at least in India. But I've seen where CFOs have the ability to, get the next CEO, right? Simply because of the relationships that they share in that industry.
yeah. Okay. The best quarantine hack that you recommend?
I think I had grossly underestimated the value of LinkedIn as a channel, right? So for me, it was a great way to kind of keep in touch with my alumni networks and clients, and but more than that, I think the value of LinkedIn is really in the value that you're able to provide to the people around. And ever since I have started using LinkedIn as a channel to kind of express my thoughts, I think I have seen a lot of conversations that have stemmed out of it.
Yeah,
So and which is the role, right? As a leader in a
yeah,
consulting firm, your role is to build and manage relationships, essentially. Like, you're not involved on a day-to-day basis on
yeah,
all the engagements. So if you're not managing relationships, then you're not as valuable as you can be.
yeah. No, I mean, I have a similar story as well with LinkedIn. I mean, I got on the platform, I think, in 2008, 2009, when I first started in sales, and really only used the platform properly in the last like 3 to 5 years, whether
Right.
it's reaching out to people or posting updates and so on. And it's a phenomenal platform, right? As a founder, if you're not posting, if you're not connecting with people on LinkedIn, then you're missing out on heck of a lot of value that's right there on the table for the taking. Yeah. Uh, so, what books are you reading right now? What would you recommend?
So there are two books that I'm really reading right now. One of them is A Good Strategy and Bad Strategy. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a fantastic book of how you can really craft a strategy for your organization. Right. So I've seen, at least from my experience and working with a number of organizations, strategy can be an extremely powerful tool, which can help significantly improve the amount of time that it takes to make a decision. Right. So if you have a good strategy laid out for your business or your organization, you know what opportunities to kind of strike down and what to double down on. So I think that's one of the key things. The other book that I'm reading right now is called Canon, by and it has nothing to do with business, but I'm a big believer in Edward de Bono's lateral thinking, right? So you need to have diverse reading, you need to have diverse experiences if you want to be able to add value, because you're
Yeah,
only able to get in lateral thoughts and concepts,
yeah,
and that's when you're able to add more value to conversations.
yeah. No, that's a great point. Actually, I mean, we had Hari, who is Chief People Officer at Big Basket, and
Right.
he mentioned how his love for history and literature has taught him so much about managing people, uh,
Right.
right? Yeah, and that bit about execution also, right? I mean, in my mind, I think about strategy that you were talking about. Uh, Strategy is one of those things that, I mean, if you sort of think about it, right, and then after that, maybe near 100% you can focus on execution, right? Obviously, I mean, you will have to change strategically or tactically as and when circumstance presents itself. But yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that is that's sort of seen as a four-letter word in startup. Yeah,
Yeah, and great point, Roshan. Actually, so if you look at strategy itself, right, I think the way most of us, at least, are taught about strategy is that it's very amorphous to mission, vision, those
yeah,
those kind of that kind of language. But it really is not. It's how are you going to take the core capabilities or strengths that you possess, and how would you use it to extrapolate business value, right? So it's very different from how we kind of think about it, and having a good strategy can make a big difference in what you're doing.
yeah.
And unfortunately, because people don't know what strategy is, the second the word strategy is used, they think that it
Tools and
means
consultants.
yeah. I mean, it's something that is being used to sell something to me.
Yeah, yeah. So we were talking about the podcasts that you listen to as well. Would you like to recommend a few?
Yeah, sure. I think my favorite podcast of at least the last 3 or 4 years has been How I Built This by Guy Raz. So it's an NPR podcast where he kind of goes through journeys with founders, and it's always interesting to learn how businesses are built. So I'm a very curious person in general, so that's something that I like to listen to. Another podcast has been 99% Invisible. This I started following, I think, from the last 5 or 6 months. But it talks about all the things that happen. Like for example, behavioral economics or decision architecture. So those are topics that I've always been kind of very passionate about, and this talks about the hidden science to it. So I think these are two great ones. I've also listened quite a lot to Blitzscaling, which is from Reid Hoffman.
Right.
Uh, so I used to like it quite a bit, but I think the number of quality episodes or quality guests have kind of reduced, at least from my
They had some
perspective.
pretty superstar guests initially, actually.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic guys. I mean, now I think it's moved to more function-based podcasts. So I'm more of a founder or CXO
Yeah,
based podcast.
yeah. So my personal favorites include the Knowledge Project by
Right.
Shane Parrish, and I listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast as
Yeah,
well.
that's that too.
And someone, of course, I admire immensely is, of course, Joe Rogan.
Right.
So these are three of my favorites. And hopefully, I mean, you start listening to the Startup Operator as well.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I've already listened to 3 or 4 episodes.
Okay. So, uh, I mean, we're at the end of what has been like a super interesting, super entertaining conversations, plenty of insights for me to, reflect upon. And typically, we like to end the podcast on an optimistic note,
Sure.
right? So, what are you optimistic about, in a post-COVID world?
See, I think one thing that's not disappeared, at least in India, I'm going to localize the answer. Purely in India is a demographic dividend that we have, right? Opportunity is not going anywhere. So we still are going to get back. There's just a temporary setback. And there is in no way a situation where we're going to be as troubled as our neighbors are, or as some of the Western countries are. So, right there, I think we have a lot to kind of look forward to. If businesses are going to face challenges, I think if they stick on, I think there's a much greener pasture on the other side.
Fantastic. Hey, it's been awesome fun talking to you. Thank you so much for making the time for this. Right? I mean, plenty of stuff that you spoke about. I think we could do separate podcasts itself, right? I mean, plenty to unpack there. Uh, Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you like this episode, then don't forget to share and subscribe. Stay safe, take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.